Hey there, and welcome. In this explainer, we are diving headfirst into what might just be the biggest, most fundamental mystery there is. Seriously, it's a question that has puzzled thinkers for thousands of years, and it sits right at the heart of philosophy, science, and even religion. So let's get into it.
Just let that sit for a second. It's so incredibly simple to ask, right? But finding an answer pushes us to the absolute edge of what we can understand. This isn't some clever riddle. It's a real cosmic puzzle.
Okay, so before we even try to look at some of the proposed answers, we have to really appreciate the sheer weight of what's being asked here. This isn't just some random thought you have late at night. For a lot of people, this is the starting point for every other question.
The 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger put it perfectly. He called it the fundamental question of metaphysics. His whole point was that, we ask tons of questions in our lives, but this is the one that everything else rests on. To even ask it, to really mean it, is to force yourself into this powerful state of questioning.
Now, Heidegger is really quick to point out that for someone with deep religious faith, this question just doesn't land the same way. If you believe the Bible is divine truth, for example, then you already have the answer. Things exist because God created them. And from that point of view, the case is kinda closed.
So here's the crucial point for Heidegger. A faith-based answer doesn't actually engage with the question, at least not philosophically. He says that if you want to authentically question, you have to be willing to step outside of any dogma. Just saying God did it is a complete answer for faith, but for philosophy, it kind of sidesteps the whole journey. It's like closing the door before you've even started.
And that leads us down Heidegger's own very unique and, let's be honest, pretty complex path. He doesn't just try to answer the question. No, he goes deeper. He dissects what it even means to be the kind of creature that can ask it in the first place. Okay, first we got to get a key distinction down. When Heidegger talks about beings with a lowercase b, he just means all the stuff that exists. A tree, a person, a planet, this screen. But being with a capital B is totally different. It's existence itself, the very isness of things. Think of it like this. Beings are all the players in a game, but being is the game itself.
And this brings us to this really important idea he has called Dasein. It's a German word that literally means being there. And this is so important because for Heidegger, we humans, as Dasein, are the one place in the entire universe where being becomes a question for itself. A rock doesn't sit around wondering why it exists. We do.
To really hammer this point home, Heidegger goes all the way back to ancient Greek tragedy. He pulls this line from Sophocles' Antigone. The key here is that he translates the Greek word dainon not as wonderful, but as uncanny. He's saying that humanity is the strangest, most uncanny thing in all of existence, precisely because we're the ones who stand up to the overwhelming power of being and ask, why?
This idea of humanity as uncanny totally flips how we usually think about history. He just rejects the whole idea that we started out as primitive and slowly got more advanced. For Heidegger, the beginning, that moment when humans first broke away and started questioning being, that was the mightiest, most powerful, most uncanny moment of all. He kind of thought everything since then has been a flattening out of that original power.
So that's one really deep philosophical path. But what about today? How are thinkers approaching this question now? We're going to switch gears here, moving from that deep dive with Heidegger to more of a quick tour through a bunch of different modern answers from physics and philosophy. These days, the answers tend to fall into a few different buckets. You got the scientific folks looking for an origin story in cosmology. Then there are logical arguments that nothing is just an impossible concept. There are even statistical arguments, and of course, people who just dismiss the question, and the age-old theological idea of a first cause or God.
What's really interesting is that a ton of these modern answers all bump into the same surprisingly tricky problem. What do we actually mean by nothing? Turns out, nothing is a lot more complicated than you'd think.
So we've really got two completely different ideas of nothing. On one hand, there's the everyday one, right? There's nothing in the box, just means the box is empty of stuff. But the philosophical and physical idea of nothing, that's an absolute void. No space, no time, no physical laws, no properties, nothing. And our brains can barely even begin to picture what that would be like. And this is where science gets really wild. The physicist Lawrence Krauss argues that what we might think of as nothing, a quantum vacuum, isn't empty at all. It's actually seething with potential energy, and it's governed by the laws of quantum mechanics.
His whole point is that this state is inherently unstable and can just spontaneously create particles, or even whole universes. From this viewpoint, true, absolute nothingness might not even be possible.
All right, let's try a totally different angle. Probability. The philosopher Ian Robinson makes this fascinating statistical case. Think about it. There is only one way for there to be absolute nothing, just one. But there are an infinite number of ways for there to be something, any particle, any law, any possible setup. So if you were placing bets at the dawn of time, the odds of something popping up are just overwhelmingly higher than the odds of nothing.
Of course, there's always the option to just kind of throw your hands up. Bertrand Russell famously argued that the universe is just a brute fact. It doesn't need an explanation. It just is. And while, okay, that's a logically sound position, for a lot of us, it just feels deeply unsatisfying. It basically shuts down the very curiosity that makes us human.
So, after exploring all these attempts at an answer, what if we're looking at this whole thing the wrong way? What if the real importance isn't in finding a final answer, but in the simple fact that we are compelled to ask the question at all? This leads us to a really mind-bending idea, sometimes called the anthropic principle. I mean, think about it. Imagine a universe full of stars and galaxies, all running on physical laws, but with no one and nothing there to see it. Does it really exist in any meaningful way? In a sense, maybe the universe needs consciousness to become fully real. Without us here to ask the question, there might as well be nothing. And that, maybe, is the ultimate thing to take away from all this. Whether you're a philosopher like Heidegger thinking about our uncanny existence, or a cosmologist modeling the Big Bang, this deep, driving need to understand why we're here is what defines our place in the cosmos. The question, why is there something rather than nothing, isn't just a question about the universe. It might be the universe asking a question through us. So let's end by turning the whole thing around. Maybe the final, perfect answer will always be just out of our grasp. But the fact that we can't stop asking, that persistent, inescapable need to know, maybe that's the most profound discovery we can make. What does our need to ask this question really tell us about who we are and what our role is in this vast something we call reality? Now that's something worth thinking about.